Chapter 16. Mary sat alone in the living room at the vicarage and watched the smoldering turf fire. She had slept long and was now rested and refreshed, but the peace for which she craved had not yet come to her. They had been kind to her and patient, and too kind perhaps, coming so sudden and unexpected after the long strain, and Mr. Besot himself, with clumsy, well-meaning hands, patted her on the shoulder as he would a hurt child, and said to her in a gruff kind of way, "Now you must sleep and forget all you have gone through, and remember it's behind you and out and over. I can promise you that we shall find the man who killed your aunt soon, very soon, and he'll hang at the next assizes. And when you are a little recovered from the shock of these last few months, you shall say what you would like to do and where you would like to go." She had no will of her own. They would make the decisions for her, and when Francis Davy offered his home for shelter, she accepted meekly and without feeling, conscious that her listless word of thanks savoured of ingratitude. Once more she knew the humility of being born a woman, when the breaking down of strength and spirit was taken as natural and unquestioned. Were she a man, now, she would receive rough treatment or indifference at the best, and be requested to write at once perhaps to Bodmin or Launceston to bear witness, within the understanding that she should find her own lodging and betake herself to the world's end, if she wished, when all questions had been asked. And she would depart when they had finished with her, and go on a ship somewhere, working her passage before the mast, or tramp the road with one silver penny in her pocket, and her heart and soul at liberty. Here she was, with tears ready to the surface and aching head, being hurried from the scene of action with smooth words and gestures, a nuisance and a factor of delay, like every woman and every child after a tragedy. The vicar had driven himself into a trap, with the squire's groom following behind on his horse, and he at least had the gift of silence, for he questioned her not at all, nor murmured sympathy to be both wasted and ignored, but drove swiftly to Algernon, and arrived there at his church, Stoke one. He roused his innkeeper from the cottage near by, the same woman that Mary had spoken to in the afternoon, bade her to come with him to the vicarage, and prepare a room for his guest, which she did at once without shuddering or exclaiming in wonder. Bringing the aired linen from her own home to lay on the bed, she kindled a fire in the grate and warmed through wooden nightdress before it, while Mary shed her clothes. And when the bed was ready for her, the smooth sheets turned black, Mary allowed herself to be led to sit as a child is led to a cradle. She would have closed her eyes at once, but for an arm suddenly around her shoulders, and a voice in her ear, "Drink this," persuasive and cool, and Francis Davy himself stood beside the bed with a glass in his hand, his strange eyes looking into hers, pale and expressionless. "You'll sleep now," he said, and she knew from the bitter taste that he had put some powder in the hot drink which he had brewed for her, and they had done this in understanding her restless, tortured mind. The last she remembered was his hand upon her forehead, and those still white eyes that told her to forget, and then she slept, as he had bidden her. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon before she woke, and the 14 hours of sleep had done the work that he intended, turning the edge of sorrow and blunting to her pain. The sharp grief for Aunt Patience had softened, the bitterness too. Reason told her that she could not put the blame upon herself. She had done only what her conscience had commanded her to do. Justice had come first. Her dull wit had not foreseen the tragedy. There lay the fault. There remained regret, and regret could not bring Aunt Patience back again. These were her thoughts on rising, but when she was dressed and had gone below to the living room to find the fire burning and the curtains drawn, the vicar abroad upon some business, the old nag's sense of insecurity returned to her, and it seemed to her that responsibility for the disaster lay on her shoulders alone. Jim's face was ever present with her as she had seen it last, drawn and haggard in the false grey light, and there had been a purpose in his eyes then, in the very set of his mouth, that she had wilfully ignored. He had been the unknown factor from the beginning to the end, from that very first morning when he had come to the bar at Jamaica, and deliberately she had shut her eyes to the truth. She was a woman, and no reason in heaven or earth she loved him. He had kissed her, and she was bound to him forever. She felt herself fallen and degraded, weakened of mind and body, who had been strong before, and her pride had gone with her independence. On word to the vicar that he returned, and a message to the squire, and Aunt Patience would be avenged. Jim would die with a rope around his neck, and his father had done, as he would return to Helford, seeking the threads of her old life, and lay twisted even now and buried in the soil. She got up from the chair beside the fire and began to walk the length of the room with some idea that she wrestled now with her ultimate problem, But even as she did so, she knew that her very action was a lie, a poor trick to appease her conscience, and the word would never be given. Jim was safe from her, and he would ride away with a song on his lips and laugh at her expense, forgetful of her, and of his brother, and of God, while she dragged through the years, sullen and bitter, and the stain of silence marking her, coming in the end to ridicule, as a soured spinster had been kissed once in her life and could not forget it. Cynicism and sentimentality were two extremes to be avoided, and as Mary prowled about the room, her mind as restless as her body, she felt as though Francis Davy himself were watching her, his cold eyes probing her soul. The room held something of him after all, now that he was not here, and she could imagine him standing in the corner by the easel, his brush in hand, staring out the window at things that were dead and gone. There were canvases with their faces to the wall close to the easel, and Mary turned them to the light and curiosity. Here was an interior of a church, his church, she supposed, painted in the twilight of midsummer, it would seem, with the nave in shadow. There was a strange green afterglow upon the arches, stretching to the roof, and this light was something sudden and unexpected that lingered in her memory after she had laid the picture aside, so that she returned to it and considered it once more. It might be that this green afterglow was a faithful reproduction, and peculiar to his church at Altrincham, but for all that it cast a hard and uncanny light upon the picture, and Mary knew that a home, she would not care for it to hang upon her walls. She could not have put her feeling of discomfort into words, but it was though some spirit, having no knowledge of the church itself, had groped its way into the interior and breathed an alien atmosphere upon the shadowed nave. As she turned the paintings one by one, she saw that they were all tainted in the same manner and to the same degree. What might have been a startling study of the moor beneath the brown lily on the spring day, with the high clouds banked up behind the tor, had been marred by the dark color and the very contour of the clouds that dwarfed the picture and overwhelmed the scene, with this same green light predominating over all. She wondered for the first time whether, by being born albino and a freak of nature, his color sense was therefore in any way impaired, and his sight itself neither normal nor true. This might be the explanation, but even so, her feeling of discomfort remained after she replaced the canvases with their faces to the wall. She continued her inspection of the room, which told her little, it being sparsely furnished anyway, and free of ornaments and books. Even his desk was bare of correspondence and looked seldom used. She drummed with her fingers on the polished surface, wondering if he sat here to write his sermons, and suddenly and unpardonably she opened the narrow drawer beneath the desk. It was empty, and at once she was ashamed. She was about to shut it when she noticed that the paper with which the drawer was laid in the corner turned, and there was some sketch drawn upon the other side. She took hold of the paper and glanced at the drawing. Once again it represented the interior of a church, but this time the congregation was assembled in the pews, and the vicar himself in the pulpit. At first Mary saw nothing unusual in the sketch. It was a subject natural enough for a vicar to choose who had skill with his pen, but when she looked closer she realized what he had done. This was not a drawing at all, but a caricature, grotesque as it was horrible. The people of the congregation were bonneted and shawled, and in their best clothes as for Sunday, but he had drawn the sheep's heads upon their shoulders instead of human faces. The animals' jaws gaped foolishly at the preacher with silly, vacant solemnity. Their hooves were folded in prayer. The features of each sheep had been touched upon with care, as though representing a living soul, but the expression on every one of them was the same, that of an idiot who neither knew nor cared. The preacher, with his black gown and halo of hair, was Francis Davy, but he had given himself a wolf's face, and the wolf was laughing at the flock beneath him. The thing was a mockery, blasphemous and terrible. Mary covered it quickly and replaced the paper in the drawer, the white sheet uppermost. Then she shut the drawer and went away from the desk and sat once more in the chair beside the fire. She had stumbled upon a secret, and she would rather that secret stayed concealed. This was something that concerned her not at all, but rested between the draughtsman and his God. When she had heard his footstep on the path outside, she rose hurriedly and moved the light away from her chair so that she would be in the shadow when he came into the room, and he could not read her face. Her chair had its back to the door, and she sat there waiting for him. But he was so long in coming that she turned at last to listen for his step, and then she saw him standing behind her chair, having entered the room noiselessly from the hall. She started in surprise, and he came forward and then into the light, making apology for his appearance. "Forgive me," he said. "You did not expect me so soon, and I blundered into your dreams." She shook her head and stammered at excuse. And then he asked at once after her health and how she had slept, stripping himself of his great coat as he spoke, and standing before the fire in his black clerical dress. "Have you eaten today?" he said, and when she told him she had not, He took out his watch and noted the time a few minutes before 6 before he compared with the clock upon his desk. "You have supped before me, then, Mary Ellen, and you shall sup with me again," he said. "But this time, if you do not mind, and if you are rested enough, you shall lay the table and fetch the tray from the kitchen. Hannah will have it prepared, and we will not trouble her again. For my part, I have writing to do, that is, if you have no objection." She assured him that she was rested and would like nothing better than to make herself useful, and nodded his head, and then said, at 6:45, turning his back on her, and she gathered that she was dismissed. She made her way to the kitchen, put something out of countenance of his abrupt arrival, and she was glad that he had given her an added half an hour to herself, as she had been ill prepared for the conversation when he found her. Perhaps that would be a brief affair, and once over, he would turn his desk again and leave her to her thoughts. She wished that she had not opened the drawer. The memory of the caricature had lingered with her unpleasantly. She felt as much a child who acquires knowledge forbidden by its parents, and then hangs his head guilty and ashamed, fearful for his tongue to betray him. She would have more comfortable could she have taken a meal alone in the kitchen and treated him as a handmaid rather than a guest. As it was, her position was not defined for courtesy, and his commands were curiously mingled. She made play with him, getting supper home with familiar kitchen smells, and awaited reluctantly the summons of the clock. The church itself chimed 3 quarters and gave her no excuse, for she carried away to the living room, hoping nothing inner feeling upon her face. He was standing with her back to the fire, pulled readiness before it, although did not look at him, felt scrutiny upon her, and her movements were clumsy. She was aware, too, that he had made some alteration to the room, and out of trail of her eyes she had taken down the easel canvases no longer stacked against the wall. The desk, for the first time, was in disorder, with papers and correspondence piled upon it, and there had been burning letters, too, for the yellow blackened scraps lay among the ashes under the turf. They sat down together at the table, and he helped her to the cold pie. "It is curiosity dead in Mary Ellen that she did not ask me what I have done by day," he said at length, mocking her gently, bringing flush of guilt to her face at once. "It is no business of mine what I have done," she answered. "You are wrong, Mary," he said. "It is your business. I have meddled in your affairs the livelong day. You asked for my help, did you not?" Mary was ashamed and hardly knew what to reply. "I have not thanked you yet for coming so promptly to Jamaica Inn," she said. "For not my bed last night and sleep today, you think me ungrateful. I never said that. I wondered only at your patience. I had not struck 2 when you bade you sleep this morning, and it is now 7 in the morning, long hours, and things do not stand still by themselves. Did you not sleep then after you left me? I slept until 8, and then I breakfasted and was away again. My grey horse was lame, and I could not use him, so progress was slow with the cob. He jogged like a snail to Jamaica Inn, and from Jamaica into North Hill. You've been to North Hill? Mr. Besant entertained me to luncheon. There were 8 or 10 of us present, I dare say, and each one of us shouting his opinion to the deaf ear of his neighbour. It was a lengthy meal, and I was glad when we came to the end of it. However, we are all of one accord that the murderer of your uncle will not remain at liberty for long. Does Mr. Besant suspect anyone?" Mary's tone was guarded, and she kept her eyes on her plate. The food tasted like sawdust in her mouth. "Mr. Besant ready to suspect himself. He has questioned every inhabitant within a radius of 10 miles, and the number of strange persons who were abroad last night is legion. It will take a week or more to have the truth from every one of them, but no matter. Mr. Besant is not deterred. What have they done with my aunt? They were taken both of them to North Hill this morning, and were to be buried there. All that has been arranged, and you need not concern yourself. As for the rest, well, we shall see. And the peddler? They have not let him go? No, he is safe under lock and key, screaming curses to the air. I do not care for the peddler. Neither, I think, do you." Mary laid aside the fork she had lifted to her lips and put down the meat again, untasted. "How do you mean?" she said, on the defensive. "I repeat, you do not care for the peddler. I can well understand it, for a more unpleasant and disagreeable fellow I have never clapped eyes upon. I gather from Richard's groom to Mr. Besant that you suspected the peddler of murder, and said as much to Mr. Besant himself. Hence my conclusion that you do not care for him. It is a pity for all of us that the bar-groom proves him innocent. He would have made an excellent scapegoat, and saved a deal of trouble." The vicar continued to make an excellent supper, but Mary was only playing with her food. When he offered her a second helping, she refused. "What has the peddler done to incur your displeasure to such an extent?" he inquired, harping upon the subject with persistence. "He attacked me once." "I thought as much. He is true to a particular type. You resisted him, of course. I believe I hurt him. He did not touch me again. No, I do not suppose he did. When did this happen? On Christmas Eve. After I left you at 5 Lanes? Yes. I am beginning to understand. You did not return, then, to the inn that night? You fell in with the landlord and his friends upon the road? Yes. And they took you with them to the shore to add to their sport? Please, Mr. Davy, do not ask me more. I would rather not speak of that night, neither here nor in the future, not ever again. There are some things that are best buried deep. You shall not speak of it, Mary Ellen. I blame myself for not having allowed you to continue their journey alone. Looking at you now with your clear-eyed and skin, The way you carry your head, and above all, the set of your chin. You bear little trace of what you endured. The word of a parish priest may not go for much, but you have shown remarkable fortitude. I admire you." She looked up at him and then away again, and fell to crumbling a piece of bread in her hand. "When I consider the peddler," he continued, after a while, helping himself generously to stewed damsons, "I feel it very remiss of the murderer not to have looked into the barred room. It may have been that he was pressed for time, but a minute or two could hardly have affected the issue, and he would most certainly have made the whole affair more thorough." "In what way, Mr. Davy?" "Why, by putting paid to the peddler's account." "You mean he might have killed him too?" "Precisely. The peddler is no ornament to the world while he lives, and dead he would at least have made food for worms. That is my opinion. What is more, had the murderer known that the peddler had attacked you, he would have had a motive strong enough to kill twice over." Mary cut herself a slice of cake she did not want, forced it between her lips. By making a pretence of eating, she gave herself countenance. The hand shook, though, that held the knife, and she made a poor job of her slice. "I don't see," she said, "what I have to do with the matter." "You have too modest an opinion of yourself," he replied. They continued to eat in silence, Mary with lowered head and eyes firm fixed upon her plate. Instinct told her that he played her as an angler-fish plays upon his line. At last she could wait no longer, but blurt him a question. "So, Mr. Besant and the rest of you have made a little headway after all, if the murderer is still at large?" "Oh, but we have not moved so slowly as that. Some progress has been made. The peddler, for instance, his hopeless attempt as fur and sewn skins, turned the king's evidence to the best of his ability, has not helped us much. We have had from him bald account of the work done on the coast of Christmas Eve, which, he says, took no part, and also patching together the long months that have gone before. We heard of the wagons came to Jamaica Inn by night, among other things, and we have given the names of his companions, those he knew, that is to say. The organization appears to have been far larger than was hitherto supposed." Mary said nothing. She shook her head when he offered her the damsons. "In fact," continued the vicar, "he went so far as to suggest that the landlord of Jamaica Inn was their leader in name only, and that your uncle had his orders from one above him. That of course puts a new complexion on the matter." The gentleman became excited and a little disturbed. "What have you to say of the peddler's theory? It is possible, of course. I believe you once made the same suggestion of me." "I may have done, I forget. If this is so, it would seem that the unknown leader and the murderer must be one and the same person. Don't you agree?" "Well, yes, I suppose so. That should narrow the field considerably. We may disregard the general rabble of the company and look for someone with a brain and personality. Did you ever see such a person at Jamaica Inn?" "No, never." "He must have gone to and fro in stealth, possibly in silence, in the night, when you and your aunt were abed and asleep. He would not have come by the high road, because you would have heard the clatter of his horse's hoofs. But there is always the possibility that he came on foot, is there not?" "Yes, there is always that possibility, as you say, in which case the man must know the moors, or at least have local knowledge. One of the gentlemen suggests that he lived near by, within walking or riding distance, that is to say, and that is why Mr. Besant intends to question every inhabitant of the radius of 10 miles, as I explained to you at the beginning of supper. So you see the net will close around the murderer, and if he tarries long he will be caught. We are convinced of that. Have you finished already? You've eaten very little. I am not hungry. I am sorry for that. Hannah will think her cold pie not appreciated. Did I tell you I saw an acquaintance of yours today?" "No, you did not. I have no friends but yourself." "Thank you, Mary Ellen. That is a pretty compliment, and I shall treasure it accordingly. But you are not being strictly truthful, you know. You have an acquaintance. You told me so yourself." "I don't know who you mean, Mr. Davy. Come now. Did not the landlord's brother take you to Launceston Fair?" Mary gripped her hands under the table, and dug her nails into her flesh. "The landlord's brother," she repeated, playing for time. "I have not seen him since then. I believed him to be away." "No, he has been in the district since Christmas. He told me so himself. As a matter of fact, it had come to his ears that I had given you shelter, and it came upon to me the message for you. 'Tell her how sorry I am.' That is what he said. I presume he referred to your aunt." "Was that all he said?" "I believe he would have said more, but Mr. Besant interrupted us." "Mr. Besant? Mr. Besant was there when he spoke to you? Why, of course. There were several of the gentlemen in the room. It was just before I came away from North Hill this evening, when the discussion was closed for the day. Why was Jim Merlin present in the discussion? He had a right, I suppose, as a brother of the deceased. He did not appear as much moved by the loss, but perhaps they did not agree." Did Mr. Besant and the gentleman question him?" "There was a considerable amount of talk among them the whole day. Young Merlin appears to possess intelligence. His answers were most astute. He must have a far better brain than his brother ever had. You told me he lived somewhat precariously, I remember. He stole horses, I believe?" Mary nodded. Her fingers traced a pattern on the tablecloth. "He seems to have done when there was nothing better to do," said the vicar. "But when a chance came to him, intelligence took it. He small blame to him, I suppose. No doubt he was well The gentle voice wore away at her nerves, pinpricking them with every word, and she knew now he had defeated her, and there was no longer pretense of indifference. She lifted her face to him, his eyes heavy with the agony of restraint, and she spread out her hands in supplication. "What will they do to him, Mr. Davy?" she said. "What will they do to him?" The pale, expressionless eyes stared back at her, and for the first time she saw a shadow pass across them, and a flicker of surprise. "Do?" he said, obviously puzzled. "What would they do? Anything. I suppose he has made his peace with Mr. Passat and has nothing more to fear. They will hardly throw old sins in his face after the service he's done them." "I don't understand you. What service has he done?" "Your mind worked slowly tonight, Mary Ellen, and I appear to talk in riddles. Did you not know that it was Jim Merlin who informed us against his brother?" She stared at him stupidly, her brain clogged and refusing to work. She repeated the words after him like a child who learns a lesson. "Jim Merlin informed against his brother?" The vicar pushed away his plate and began to set things in order on the tray. "Why, certainly," he said. "So Mr. Passat gave me to understand. It appears that it was the squire himself who fell in with your friend at Launceston on Christmas Eve and carried him off to North Hill as an experiment. 'You've stolen my horse,' said he. 'You're as big as a rogue as your brother. It's the power to clap you in jail tomorrow, and you wouldn't set your eyes on a horse in a dozen years or more. But you can go free and bring me proof that your brother at Jamaica Inn is the man I believe him to be.' Your young friend asked for time, and when the time was up he shook his head. 'No,' said he, 'you must catch him yourself if you want him. I'm darned if I have the truck in the law.' The squire flushed proclamation under his nose. 'Look here, Jim,' he said, 'and see what you think of that. There had been the bloodiest wreck on Christmas Eve since the Lady of Gloucester went ashore above Padstow last winter. Now you'll change your mind?' And to the rest of the story the squire said little in my hearing. People were coming and going all the time, you must remember, but I gather your friend slipped his chain and forgot it in the night, and came back again yesterday morning when they thought to have seen the last of him, and went straight to the squire's who came at the church and said, 'As cool as you please. Very well, Mr. Besant, you shall have your proof.' And that is why I remarked to you just then that Jim Merlin had better brain than his brother." The vicar cleared his table and stretched in the corner, turned, stretched his legs before the fire, and eased in the narrow, high-backed chair. Mary took no account of his movements. She stared before her into space, her whole mind split, as it were, by this information. The evidence she had so fearfully and painfully built against the man she loved collapsing into nothing like a pack of cards. "Mr. Davy," she said slowly, "I believe I am the biggest fool that ever came out of Cornwall. I believe you are, Mary Ellen," said the vicar. His dry tone, so cutting out the gentle voice, she knew was a rebuke in itself, and she accepted it with humility. "Whatever happens," she continued, "I can face the future now bravely and without shame. I am glad of that," he said. She shook her hair from her face and smiled for the first time since she had known her. The anxiety in the dead had gone out but for less. "What else did Jim Merlin say and do?" she asked. The vicar glanced at his watch and replaced it with a sigh. "I wish I had nearly 8 already. The hours go by too fast for both of us. Enough about Jim Merlin for the present. Tell me one thing. Was it North Hill you left?" "He was. In fact, it was his last remark that hurried me home." "What did he say to you?" "He did not address himself to me. He announced his intention of riding over tonight to visit the blacksmith at Warlegan." "Mr. Davy, you are playing with me now." "I most certainly am not. Warlegan is a long trek from North Hill, but I dare say he can find his way in the dark. What is it to you if he visits the blacksmith? He will show the nail he picked up in the heather down in the field below Jamaica, and the nail comes from a horse's shoe. The job was carelessly done, of course. The nail was a new one, and Jim Merlin, being a stealer of horses, knows the work of every blacksmith on the moors. Look here," he said to the squire, "I found it this morning in the field behind the inn. You have your discussions and want me no more. I'll ride to Warlegan with your leave, and throw this in Tom Jory's face as bad workmanship." "Well, and what then?" said Mary. "Yesterday was Sunday, was it not? And on Sunday no blacksmith plies his trade unless he has great respect for his customer. Only one traveller passed Tom Jory's smithy yesterday and bagged a new nail for his lame horse. The time was, I suppose, somewhere near 7 o'clock in the evening, after which the traveller continued his journey by way of Jamaica Inn." "How do you know this?" said Mary. "Because the traveller was the vicar of Altamont," he said. 17. A silence had fallen upon the room. Although the fire burned steady as ever, there was a chill in the air that had not been there before. Each waited for the other to speak, and Mary heard Francis Davy swallow at once. What she expected. The stale, steadfast eyes staring across her at the table, cold no longer, burning in the white mask of his face like living things at last. She knew now what she would have her now. But still she said nothing. She clung to ignorance as a source of protection, playing for time as the only ally in her favor. His eyes compelled her to speak, and she continued to warm her hands at the fire, forcing a smile. "You are pleased to be mysterious tonight, Mr. Davy." He did not answer at once. She heard him swallow again, and he leaned forward in his chair, with an abrupt change of subject. You lost your confidence in me today before I came, he said. You went to my desk and found the drawing. You were disturbed. No, I did not see you. I am no keyhole watcher. But I saw that the paper had been moved. You said to yourself, as you have said before, what manner of this man is the vicar of Altanoon? And when you heard my footsteps on the path, you crouched in your chair there before the fire rather than look upon my face. Don't shrink from me, Yellen. There is no longer any need for pretense between us, and we can be frank with one another, you and I. Mary turned to him, and then went again. There was a message in his eye that feared to read. I'm very sorry I went to your desk, she said. Such an action was unforgivable, and I don't know how yet to come into it. And the drawing ignorant of such things cannot say. Never mind if it good or bad. The point is it frightened you. Yes, Mr. Davy, it did. You said to yourself again, this man is a freak of nature, and his world is not my world. You're right there, Mary Ellen. I live in the past where men are not so humble as they were today. Oh, not your heroes of history and doublet and hose and narrow-pointed shoes. They were never my friends long ago, the beginning of the time the rivers and sea where the old gods walked the hills. He rose from his chair and stood before the fire, a lean black figure with white hair and eyes, and his voice was gentle now as she had known it first. Were you a student, you should understand, he said, but you are a woman, living already in the 19th century, and because of this my language is strange to you, as I am a freak in nature and freak in time. I do not belong here. And I was born with a grudge against age and a grudge against mankind. Peace is very hard to find in the 19th century. The silence is gone, even on the hills. I fought to find it in the Christian church. The dogma stick in me. The whole foundation is built upon a fairy tale. Christ himself is a figurehead, a puppet thing created by man himself. However, we can conquer things later when the heat and the turmoil and pursuit is not upon us. We have eternity before us, one thing at last. We have no traps or baggage, but can travel light and can travel bold. Mary looked up at him, his hands gripping the sides of her chair. I do not understand you, Mr. Davy. Why, yes, you understand me very well. You know that I liked to kill the landlord at Jamaica Inn, and his wife too. Nor the peddler have lived, had I known of his existence. You have pieced the story together in your own mind while I talked to you just now. You knew that it was I who directed every move made by your uncle, and that he was a leader in name alone. I have sat here at night with him in your chair here, and a map of Cornwall spread upon the table before us. Joss Merlin, the terror of the countryside, twisting his hat in his hands and touching his forelock when I spoke to him. He was like a child at a game, powerless with my orders, a poor blustering bully that hardly knew his right hand from his left. His vanity was like a ball between us. The greater his notoriety among his companions, the better he was pleased. You were successful and you served me well. No other man knew the secret of our partnership. You were the block, Mary Ellen, against which we stubbed our toes. With your wide, inquiring eyes and your gallant, inquisitive head, you came among us, and I knew that the end was near. In any case, we had played the game to its limit, and the time had come to make an end. How you pestered me with your courage and your conscience, and how I admired you for it. Of course, you must hear me in the empty guest room at the inn. I must creep down to the kitchen and see the rope upon the beam. That was your first challenge. And then you steal out upon the moor after your uncle. You had a tryst with me on the rafter, and losing the darkness, stumble upon myself and make me a confidant. Well, I became your friend, did I not, and give you good advice, which, believe me, could not have buttered against magistrate yourself. Your uncle knew nothing against our strange alliance, nor would he have understood. He brought his own death upon himself by disobedience. I knew something of your determination, and that you would betray him at the first excuse. Therefore he should give you none. The time alone would quiet your suspicions. But your uncle must drink himself to madness on Christmas Eve, and blundering like a savage and a fool, set the whole country in a blaze. I knew then that he had betrayed himself, and with the rope upon his neck, and would play this last card and name me master. Therefore he had to die, Mary Ellen, and your aunt, who was his shadow. And had you been at the Jamaica Inn last night, would I pass by you too? No, you would not have died. He leaned down to her, and taking her two hands, he pulled her to her feet so that she stood level with him, looking in his eyes. No, he repeated, you would not have died. You would have come with me then, as you will come tonight. She stared back at him, watching his eyes. They told her for nothing. They were clear and cold as they had been before, but his grip upon her wrist was firm and held no promise of release. You are wrong, she said. You would have killed me then, as you would kill me now. I am not coming with you, Mr. Davy. Death to dishonor? He said, smiling, the thin line breaking the mask of his face. I face you with no such problem. You have gained your knowledge of the world from old books. Mary with a bad man wears a tail beneath his cloak, and breathes fire through his nostrils. You have proved yourself a dangerous opponent, and I prefer you by my side there. That is a tribute. You are young, and you have certain grace with which I hate to destroy. Besides, in time we will take up the threads of our first friendship, which has gone astray tonight. You are right to treat me as a child and a fool, Mr. Davy, said Mary. I have been both since I stumbled against your horse that November evening. Any friendship we may have shared was a mockery and a dishonor, and you have You gave me counsel with the blood of an innocent man, scarce dry upon your hands. My uncle was at least was honest, drunk or sober. He blurted his crime to the four winds, and dreamed of them only by night, to his terror. But you wear the garments of a priest of God to shield you from suspicion. You hide behind the cross. You talk to me of friendship. Your revolt and your disgust please me the more, Mary Ellen, he replied. There is a dash of fire about you that the women of old possessed. Your companionship is not a thing to be thrown aside. Come, let us leave religion out of our discussion. When you know me better, you will return to it, and I will tell you now how I sought refuge for myself in Christianity, and found it to be built upon hatred and jealousy and greed, all the man-made attributes of civilization, while the old pagan barbarism was naked and clean. I've had my soul sickened, poor Mary, with your feet fast in the 19th century, and your bewildered, fond face looking up into mine, who admit myself a freak of nature, and shame upon your little world. Are you ready? Your cloak hangs in the hall, and I am waiting. She backed to the wall, her eyes upon the clock. But he still held her wrists and tightened his grip upon them. Understand me, he said gently. The house is empty, you know that, and the pitiful vulgarity of screams would be heard by no one. The good Hannah is in her cottage, by her own fireside, on the other side of the church. I am stronger than you would suppose. A poor white ferret looks frail enough and misleads you, doesn't he? But your uncle knew my strength. I don't want to hurt you, Mary Ellen, or spoil that trace of beauty you possess for the sake of quiet, but that I shall have to do if you withstand me. Come, there is that spirit of adventure which you have made your own. Where is your courage and your gallantry? She saw by the clock that he must have overstepped already his margin of time and had little in reserve. He concealed his impatience well, but it was there in the flicker of his eye and tightening his lips. It was 8:30, and by now Jim would have spoken with the blacksmith at Watergan. 12 miles lay between them, perhaps, but no more. And Jim was not the fool that Mary herself had been. She thought rapidly, weighing upon the chances of failure and success. If she went now with Francis Davy, she would be dragged upon him, and a break in his speed. That was inevitable, and he must have gambled upon it. The chase would follow hard upon his heels, and her presence would betray him in the end. She would refuse to go. Why, then, there would be a knife in her breast, for she would not encumber himself with a wounded companion for all his flattery. Gallant he had called her, and possessed with the spirit of adventure. Well, he should see what distance her courage took her, and that she should gamble with her life as well as he. If he were insane, and this she believed him to be, why then his insanity would bring about his destruction. If he were not mad, she would be that same stumbling block she had been to him from the beginning, with her girl's wits matched against his brains. She had the right upon her side, and faith in God, and he was an outcast in a hell of his own creation. She smiled then, and looked into his eyes, having made her decision. I'll come with you, Mr. Davy, she said, but you'll find me a thorn in the flesh and a stone in your path. You'll regret it in the end. Come as enemy or friend, that does not matter to me, he told her. You shall be the millstone around my neck, and I'll like you the better for it. You'll soon cast your mannerisms aside and all your poor trappings of civilization that suckled into your system as a child. I'll teach you to live, Mary Ellen, as men and women have not lived for 1,000 years or more. You'll find me no companion on your road, Mr. Davy. Roads? Who spoke of roads? We go by the moors and the hills, and tread granite and heather as the Druids did before us. She could have laughed into his face, but he turned to the door and held it open for her, and she bowed to him, mocking. As she passed into the passage, she was filled with a wild spirit of adventure, and she had no fear for him, and no fear of the night. Nothing mattered now, because the man she loved was free and had no stain of blood upon him. She could love him without shame, and cry it aloud had she the mind. She knew what he had done for her, and that he would come to her again. In fancy she heard him ride upon the road in the pursuit, and heard his challenge and his triumphant cry. She followed Francis Davy to the stable, where the horses were saddled, and this was a sight for which she was ill prepared. Did you not mean to take the trap? She said. Are you not great enough encumbrance already without further baggage? He replied, No, Mary, we must travel light and free. You can ride. Every woman born in a farm can ride, and I shall hold your rein. Speed I cannot promise you, alas, for the cob has been worked today will begrudge us more. As for the grey, he is lame, and you will make poor mileage for us. All restless, the departure is half your fault. Did you but know it? When you cast your nail in the heather, you betrayed your master. You must carry a woman on your back as penance. The night was dark, and the wild dampness in the air, and a chill wind. The sky was overcast with a low flying cloud, and the moon was blotted out. There would be no light upon the way, and the horses would travel unseen. It seemed as though the first cast was against the Mary, and the night itself favored the vicar of Alternan. She climbed into the saddle, wondering whether a shout or a wild cry for help would rouse the sleeping village. But even as the thought flashed through her mind, she felt his hand upon her foot. Placing it in the stirrup and looking down upon him, she saw the gleam of steel beneath his cape, and he lifted his head and smiled. "There's a full trace, Mary," he said. "They go to bed early in afternoon. By the time they were stirring, rubbing their eyes, I should be away on the moor yonder, and you would be lying of face with a long wet grass for a pillow, and your youth and beauty spoiled. Come now, if your hands and feet are cold, the ride will warm them, and restless will carry you well." She said nothing, but took the reins in her hands. She had gone too far now in her game of chance, and must play it to the finish. He mounted the bay cob with Gray attached to him by a leading rein, and they set out upon their fantastic journey like two pilgrims. As they passed in the silent church, shadowed and closed, and left it behind them, the vicar flourished his black shovel hat and bared his head. "You should have heard me preach," he said softly. "They sat there in stalls like sheep, even as I drew them, with their mouths agape and their souls asleep. The church was a roof upon their heads, the full walls of stone, because it had been blessed at the beginning by human minds as with holy. They do not know the beneath the foundation stone lies of their pagan ancestors, the old granite altars where sacrifices long I have stood at the church tonight, Mary, listened to the silence. It is a murmur of the air and a whisper of unrest that bred deep in the soil and had no knowledge of the church, and now turn it." His words had found echo in her mind and carried her away back to the dark passage of Jamaica Inn. She remembered how she had stood there with her uncle dead upon the ground, and there was a sense of horror and the fear about the walls that was born of an old cause. His death was nothing only a repetition of what had been before long ago in time, where the hill where Jamaica stood today was bare for the heather and stone. She remembered how she had shivered, as though touched by a cold, inhuman hand. And she shivered now, looking at Francis Davy with his white hair and his eyes that had looked upon the past. They came to the fringe of moor and rough track leading up to the ford, and then beyond this and across the stream, the black part of the moor, there were no tracks and no paths, and only coarse, tufted grass and the dead heather. Ever and again the horses stumbled in stones and sank the soft ground, bordering their harshes and their swords. Francis Davy found his way the hawk in the air, hovering an instant and brooding upon the grass beneath him, swerving and plunging the hard ground. The torch rose up around them and hid the world behind. The true horses were lost between the tumbling hills. Side by side they picked their path through the dead bracken of the short, uncanny stride. Mary's host began faltering. She looked over her shoulder at the black hills that dwarfed her. The miles stretched between her and the dark, and already the north hill belonged to another world. There was another magic of the moors that made them inaccessible. Spacing them to eternity, Francis Davy knew their secret and cut through the darkness like a blind man to his hold. "Where are we bound?" she said at length, and he turned to her, smiling beneath his shovel hat, and pointed to the north. "This time there will come the officers of the law will walk the coasts of Cornwall," he said. "I told you that on our last journey when you rode with me to Launceston. But tonight and tomorrow we shall meet no interference. Only the gulls and the wild birds haunt the cliffs from Baldcastle to Hartland. I'm glad to get them befriended with one savage, perhaps more ruthless than I intended, but my friend nevertheless. You heard of ships, Mary Ellen, I believe the lake. You would not speak for them, but the ship would be the carry us to Cornwall. So we are to leave England and work with them. What else would you suggest? Today the vicar of Altanu must cast himself adrift from Holy Church, become fugitive again. We shall see Spain, Mary, in Africa. Our Lord took his son, you foolish desert sand upon your feet, you will. I care little where you go, as you can make it shores. Will you smile and shake your head? I smile because everything you say is fantastic, Mr. Davy, and impossible. You know as well as I do, shall run for you to the first chance at a first village, perhaps. I came with you tonight because you would have killed me over the nights and well. But in daylight, the sight and sound of men and the women, you will be powerless as I am now. Yes, you will, Mary Ellen. I am prepared for the risk. You forget in your happy confidence the north coast of Cornwall bears no relation to the south. You come from Halford. You told me the present lanes wind by the sound of where your villages touch one another, string upon string, and there are the cottages upon the third. The north coast hardly so hospitable. You'll find it as lonely and untraveled as these moors themselves. Never a man's face will you look upon but mine. We will be out of heaven and mine. Let me grant you that, then, said Mary, with a bluster from fear. Let me grant even that the sea is reached, and we wait upon a ship and the coast behind us. Name any country as you please, Africa or Spain. Do you think I shall follow you there and not expose you, a murderer of men? You have forgotten it by then, Mary Ellen. Forgotten that you killed my mother's sister? Yes, and more besides. Forgotten the Moors and Jamaica Inn and your own little blundering feet that stumbled across my fast. Forgetting your tears and the high road from Launceston and the young man who caused them. You are pleased to be personal, Mr. Davy. I am pleased to have touched you on the raw. Oh, don't bite your lip, he frowned. I can guess your thoughts. I told you before, I've heard confessions in my day, and I know the dreams of women better than you do yourself. Though I have the advantage of my landlord's brother. He smiled again, the line breaking her face, and he turned away though she could not see his eyes degraded her. They rode on in silence after a while. It seemed to Mary that the darkness of the night had become intensified, the air closer, nor she could see the hills around her, as she had before. The horses picked their way delicately, and now and then stopped in their tracks and snorted, as though in fear, uncertain of their steps. The ground was soggy now and treacherous, and though Mary could no longer see their land on either side, she knew by the feel of the soft yielding grass that they were encompassed by marshes. This accounted by the horse's fear to glance at her companion, to discover his mood. He leaned forward in his saddle, straining his eyes to the darkness that every moment it became thicker and harder to penetrate, and she saw by his tense profile that his mouth tight, closed like a trap, and was concentrating every nerve upon the passage, and fraught suddenly with the road danger. The nervousness of her horse communicated itself to the rider. Mary thought of the same marshes she had seen in the broad light of the day, to brown tufted grass, to the wind beyond the reeds, quivering and rustling beneath his breath, crowding them, while beneath them the black water waited in silence. She knew that people of the moors themselves could go crazy after their step, and one moment could stumble the next and sink without warning. Francis Davy knew the moors, but even he was not infallible and might lose his way. A brook burbled and made song. A brook could be heard running over the stones for a mile or more. And the water of the marshes made no sound. The first slip could be the last. His nerves were strung to expectation, and half consciously she made preparations to fling herself from the saddle, and should her horse stagger her suddenly, with sickening plunge, grope for like a blind thing in those strangling weeds. She heard her companion swallowing the little trick, put an age upon her fear. He peered to the right and left, his hand better to his sight, and already the moisture glistened in his hair and clung to his garments. Mary watched the damp rise from the she smelt the sour and rotting tang of the reeds, and then in front of them, bearing the further progress, whirled a great bank of fog out of the night, and a white wall stifled every scent and sound. Francis Davy drew rein, and the two horses obeyed them instantly, trembling and snorting, and steam from the flanks merging with the mist. They waited a while, for the moorland fog can roll away suddenly as it comes, but this time there was no thin clearing of the air and no dissolving threads. It hung about them like a spider's web. Then Francis Davy turned to Mary like a ghost. He looked beside her, with the fog on his lashes and his hair and his masked face inscrutable as ever. You know, sometimes it reads like word salads, and I don't get it. The gods have gone against me after all, he said. I know these fogs of old, and this one will not lift for several hours. To continue now among the marshes would be worse madness than to return. We must wait for the dawn. She said nothing, her first hopes returning to her again, but even as the thought came to her, she remembered the fog baffled pursuit, and was an enemy to the hunter as well as to the hunted. Where are we? She asked. As she spoke, she took her rein once more and urged the horses to the left, away from the low ground, until the yielding grass gave place to firmer heather and loose stones, while the white fog moved with them step by step. There will be rest for you after all, Mary Ellen, he said, and a cave for your shelter and granite for your bed. Tomorrow it may bring the world to you again, but tonight you shall sleep in the rafter. See, that doesn't make sense to me, because he just threatened to, I thought he was threatening that she will be killed by him and just laid aside. And then he's saying, no, you'll go with me to other countries. It's just... Where are we? She asked, and she took her rein once more and urged the horses to the left, away from the low ground, until the yielding grass gave... Oh my gosh. There will be rest for you after all, Mary Ellen, he said, and a cave for your shelter and granite for your bed. Tomorrow may bring the world to you again, but tonight you shall sleep on rafter. I mean, I get that they travel, but the thing is, sometimes the way it's described is just so over wordy, over busy, and I just mentally, it just doesn't, I can't picture it. The horses bent to the strain, and they climbed slowly and ponderously out of the mist to the black hills beyond. Is it night or day? That too, I don't even remember. Is it supposed to be night or day? Later, Mary shouted in her cloak like a phantom figure with her back against a hollow stone. Her knees were drawn to her chin, with her arms clasped tight around them. But even so, the raw air found its way between the folds of her cloak and lapped her skin. The great jagged summit of the tor, I don't even know what tor means, lifted its face to the sky like a crown above the mist, and below them the clouds hung solid and unchanged, a massive wall defying penetration. The air was pure here and crystal clear, disdaining of knowledge of the world below, where living things must grope and stumble in the mist. There was a wind here that whispered in the stones and stirred the heather. There was a breath, keen as a knife and cold, and blew upon the surface of the altar slabs and echoed in the caves. These sounds mingled with one another and became like a little clamor in the air. Then they would droop again and fall away, and an old dead silence come upon the place. The horses stood against a boulder for shelter, and their heads together for company, but even they would restless and uneasy, turning around against their master. They sat apart a few yards distant from his companion, and sometimes she felt his eyes upon her in consideration, weighing the chances of success. She was ever watchful, ever ready for attack, and when he moved suddenly or turned upon his slab of stone, her hands unclasped themselves from her knees, and she waited, her fists clenched. He had bade her sleep, but sleep would never come to her night. Should it creep to her insidiously, she would fight against it, beat it away with her hands, and strive to overcome it, even as she must overcome her enemy. She knew that sleep might take her suddenly, before she was aware, and later she would wake with the touch of his cold hands upon her throat and his pale face above her. She would see the short white hair frame his face like a halo, and still expressionless eyes glow with the light she had known before. Again, like, does he intend to kill her or does he not intend to kill her? It's just the indecisiveness of that makes it really difficult sometimes to figure out. Ugh. This was his kingdom here, alone in the silence, with the great twisted peaks of granite to shield him, the white mist below to shroud him. Once she heard him clear his throat and thought to speak. She thought how far removed they were from any sphere of life, two beings flung together in eternity, and that this was a nightmare, with no day to follow it, so that soon she must lose herself and merge into his shadow. He said nothing, and out of the silence came the whisper of the wind again. It rose and fell, making a moan upon the stones. This was a new wind, with a sob and a cry behind it, a wind that came from nowhere, bound from no shore. It rose from the stones themselves, and from the earth and beneath the stones. It sang in hollow caves and in the crevices of rock, and at first a sigh and then a lamentation. It played upon the air like a chorus from the dead. Mary drew her cloak around her and pulled the hood about her ears to muffle the sound, but even as she did so the wind increased, tugging at her hair, and a little ripple of draught ran screaming to the cave behind her. There was no source to the disturbance, for below the tor the heavy fog clung to the ground, obstinate as ever, and never a breath of air to roll away the clouds. Here on the summit the wind fretted and wept, whispering of fierce sobbing old memories of bloodshed and despair, and there was a wild lost note that echoed in the granite high above Mary's head, on the very peak of Rufter. I don't know what Rufter means, as though the gods themselves stood there with their great heads lifted to the sky. In her fancy she could hear the whisper of 1,000 voices and the tramping of 1,000 feet, and she could see the stones turning to men beside her. Their faces were inhuman, older than time, carved and rugged like the granite, and they spoke in a tongue that she could not understand. Their hands and feet were curved like claws of bird. They turned their stone eyes upon her, and looked through her and beyond, heeding her not, and she knew that she was like a leaf in the wind, tossed hither and thither to no ultimate purpose, while they lived and endured monsters of antiquity. They came towards her, shoulder to shoulder, neither seeing nor hearing her, but moving like blind things to her destruction. She cried suddenly and started to her feet, every nerve in her body throbbing and alive. The wind dropped, and was no more than a breath upon her. The slabs of granite stood beyond her, dark and immobile as they had done before, and Francis Davy watched her, his chin upon his hands. "You fell asleep," he said, as she told him no, doubting her own statement, her mind still grappling with the dream that was no dream. "You are tired, yet you persist in watching for the dawn," he said. "It is barely midnight now, and there are long hours to wait. Give way to nature, Mary Ellen, and relax. Do you think I want to harm you?" "I think nothing, but I cannot sleep. You are chilled, crouched there in your cloak with no stone behind your head. I am little better myself, and there is no draught here from a crevice in the rock. We would do well if we gave our warmth to one another. No, I am not cold. I make the suggestion because I understand something of the night," he said. "The coldest hour comes before the dawn. You are unwise to sit alone. Come and lean against me back to back and sleep then, if you will. I have neither the mind nor the desire to touch you." She shook her head in reply and pressed her hands together beneath her cloak. She could not could not see his face where he sat in shadow with his profile turned to her, but she knew that he was smiling in the darkness and mocked her for her fear. She was cold as he had said, and her body craved for warmth. But she would not go to him for protection. Her hands were numb now, and her feet had lost all feeling, and it was as though the granite had become part of her and held her close. Her brain kept falling on and off in a dream, and he walked into it a giant, fantastic figure with white hair and eyes, who touched her throat and whispered in her ear. She came to a new world, peopled with his kind, who barred her progress with outstretched arms, and then she would wake again, stung to reality by the chill wind on her face, and nothing had changed, neither in the darkness nor the mist, nor the night itself, and only 60 seconds had gone in time. Sometimes she walked with him in Spain, and he picked her monstrous flowers with purple heads, smiling all the while. And when she would have thrown them from her, they clung about her skirt like tendrils, creeping to her neck, fastening upon her with poisonous, deadly grip. Or she would ride beside him in a coach, squat and black like a beetle, and the walls closed in upon them both, squeezing them together and pressing the life and the breath from their bodies until they were flat, broken, and destroyed, lay against one another, poised for to eternity, two slabs of granite. She woke from this last dream to certainty, feeling his hand upon her mouth, and this time it was no hallucination of her wandering mind, but grim reality. She would have struggled with him, but he held her fast, speaking harshly in her ear and bidding her to be still. He forced her hands behind her back and bound them, neither hastily nor brutally, but with cool and calm deliberation, using his own belt. The strapping was efficient, but not painful, and he ran his finger under the belt to satisfy himself that it would not chafe her skin. She watched him helplessly, feeling his eyes on her own, as though by doing so she might anticipate a message from his brain. Then he took a handkerchief from the pocket of his coat and folded it and placed it in her mouth, knotting it behind her head, so that speech or cry was now impossible, and she must lie there waiting for the next move in the game. When he had done this, he helped her to her feet, for her legs were free and she could walk, and he led her to a little way beyond the granite borders to the slope of the hill. "I have to do this, Mary, for both our sakes," he said. "When we set forth last night upon this expedition, I reckoned without the mist. If I lost now, it will be because of this. Listen to this, and you will understand why I have bound you, and why your silence may save us yet." He stood on the edge of a hill, holding her arm, and pointed downwards to the white mists below. "Listen," he said again. Your ears may be sharper than mine." She knew now she must have slept longer than she thought, for the darkness had broken above their heads and morning had come. The clouds were low and straggled across the sky through interwoven the mist, while the east a faint glow heralded the pale, reluctant sun. The fog was with them still and hid the moors below like a white blanket. She followed the direction of his hand, could see nothing but the mist-stoking stem of the heather. When she listened as he had bade her, and far away from beneath the mist, there came a sound between a cry and a call, like a summons in the air. It was too faint at first to distinguish, and the tone was strangely pitched, unlike a human voice, unlike the shouting of men. It came nearer, rendering the air with some excitement, and Francis Davy turned to Mary, the fog still white on his lashes and his hair. "Do you know what it is?" he said. She stared back at him and shook her head, nor could she have had them speech. What? Nor could she have told him had speech been possible. She had never heard the sound before. He smiled then, a slow, grim smile that cut into his face like a wound. "I heard once, and had forgotten it, the squire of North Hill keeps bloodhounds in his kennels. It is a pity for both of us, Mary, that I did not remember." She understood him with a sudden comprehension of that distant, eager clamor. She looked up at her companion, horror in her eyes, from him to the two horses standing patiently as ever by the slabs of stone. "Yes," he said, following her glance, "we must let them loose and drive them down to the moors below. They can serve us no longer now, and would only bring the pack upon us. Poor Restless, you would betray me once again." She watched him, sick at heart, as he released the horses and led them to the steep slope of the hill. Then he bent to the ground, gathering stones in his hands, and rained blow after blow upon their flanks. So they slipped and stumbled among the wet bracken on the hillside, and then, when his onslaught continued and their instinct jogged them into action, they fled, soaring with terror, down the steep slope of the tor, dislodging boulders and earth in their descent, and so plunged out of sight into the white mists below. The baying of the hounds came nearer now, deep-pitched and persistent, and Francis Davy ran to Mary, stripping himself his long black coat that hung to his knees and throwing his hat into the heather. "Come," he said, "friend or enemy, we share a common danger now." They scrambled up the hill among the boulders and the slabs of granite, he with his arm about her, for her bound hands made progress difficult, and they waded in and out of a crevice and rock, knee-deep in soaking bracken and black heather, climbing ever higher and higher to the great peak of Rufter. Here on the very summit the granite was monstrously shaped, tortured and twisted into the semblance of a roof. Mary lay beneath the great stone slab, breathless, bleeding from her scratches, while he climbed above her, gaining foothold in the hollows of the stone. He reached down to her, and though she shook her head and made sign that she could climb no further, He bent and dragged her to her feet again, cutting at the belt that bound her, and tearing the handkerchief from her mouth. "Save yourself, then, if you can," he shouted, his eyes burning with his pale face, his white halo of hair blowing in the wind. She clung to a table of stone some 10 feet from the ground, panting and exhausted, while he climbed above her and beyond, his lean black figure like a leech on the smooth surface of the rock. The baying of hounds was unearthly and unhuman. Coming as it did from the blanket of fog below, the chorus was joined now by the cries of the shouting of men, a turmoil of excitement that filled the air with sound and was more terrible because it was unseen. The clouds moved swiftly across the sky, and the yellow glow of the sun swam into view above a breath of mist. The mist parted and dissolved. It rose from the ground in a twisting column of smoke, to be caught up in the passing clouds, and the land had covered for so long stared up at the sky, pallid and newborn. Mary looked down upon the sloping hillside, and there were little dots of men standing knee-deep in the heather, with the light of the sun shining upon them, while the yelping of the hounds, crimson-brown against the grey stone, ran before them like rats among the boulders. They came fast upon the trail, 50 men or more, shouting and pointing to the great tablets of stone. As they drew near, the clamour of the hounds echoed in the crevices and whined in the caves. The clouds dissolved as the mist had done, and a patch of sky larger than a man's hand showed blue above their heads. Somebody shouted again, and a man who knelt in the heather scarcely 50 yards from Mary lifted his gun to his shoulder and fired. The shot spat against the granite boulder without touching her, and when he rose to his feet he saw that the man was Jim, and he had not seen her. He fired again, and this time his shot whistled close to her ear, and she felt the breath of its passing upon her face. The hounds were worming in and out amid the bracken, and one of them leapt at the jutting rock beneath her, his great muzzle snuffling the stone. Snuffling the stone? What? Oh, the dogs. Then Jim fired once more, and looking beyond her, Mary saw the tall black figure of Francis Davy outlined against the sky, standing upon a wide slab like an altar, high above her head. He stood for a moment poised like a statue, his hair blowing in the wind, and then he flung out his arms as a bird throws his wings for flight, and drooped suddenly and fell, down from his granite peak to the wet, dank heather and the little crumbling stones. Okay, now I can finally... No, I can't. Okay, 18. It was a hard, bright day in early January. The ruts and holes in the high road, which were generally inches thick in mud or water, were covered with a thin layer of ice, and the wheel tracks were hoary with frost. The same frost had laid white hand upon the moors themselves, and they stretched to the horizon with infinite color, poor contrast to the clear blue sky above. The texture of the ground was crisp, with the short grass crunched beneath the foot like a shingle. In a country of lane and hedgerow, the sun would have shone warmly and make belief of spring, but here the air was sharp and cutting to the cheek, and everywhere upon the land was the rough glazed touch of winter. Mary walked along alone on 12 men's more, with the keen wind slapping her face, and she wondered why it was that Kilmer, to the left of her, had lost his menace, and was now no more than a black scarred hill under the sky. It might be that anxiety had blinded her to beauty, and she had made confusion in her mind with man and nature, the austerity of the moors that had been strangely interwoven with the fear and hatred of her uncle in Jamaica, and the moors were black, bleak still, and the hills were unfriendly, and their old malevolence had vanished, and she could walk upon them with indifference. She was at liberty now to go where she would, and her thoughts turned to Halford and the green valleys of the south. She had a queer sick longing for home in her heart, and the sight of warm, familiar faces. The broad river ran from the sea, the water lapped the beaches. She remembered with pain every scented sound that had belonged to her so long, and how the creeks branched away from the parent river like wayward children, to lose themselves in the trees and the narrow whispering streams. The woods gave sanctuary to the weary, and there was music in the cool rustle of leaves of the summer, and sheltering beneath the naked branches, even in the winter. She was hungry for the birds and their flight among the trees. She learned from homely murmurs of a farm, the cluck of hens, the clarion screech of a cock, and the flustered grasp of geese. She wanted to smell again the rich, warm dung in the sheds, and feel the warm breath of cows upon her hands, heavy footsteps treading the yard, and the clank of pails beside the well. She wanted to lean against the gate and look upon the village lane, give a good night to the passing friend, and see the blue smoke curl from the chimneys. There would be voices she would know, and high, rough and gentle in her ear, and a laugh somewhere from a kitchen window. She would concern herself with the business of a farm, rise early and draw water from the well, move among her little flock with confidence and ease, bend her back to labor and count the strain, a joy and antidote to pain. All seasons would be welcome with the harvest, and there would be peace and contentment in her mind. She belonged to the soil and returned to it again, rooted to the earth as her forefathers had been. Halford had given her birth, and when she died she would be part of it once more. Loneliness was a thing of poor account, and came not into her consideration. A worker paid no heed to solitude, but swept when his day was done. She was determined upon her course, and the way seemed fair and good to follow. She could not linger any more as she had done during the week, faint and indecisive, but to make her own project to the Bassots when she returned to the midday meal. They were kind and full of suggestions, overfull, perhaps, with their entreaties that she would stay among them for the winter at least, and rather she would feel burdened upon them, had put to her with kindly tact. They would employ her even in some position in the household, have a care, perhaps, for the children, be companion to Miss Bassett herself. To these conversations she had lent a meek and unwilling ear, committing nothing, studiously polite, and continually thanking them for what they had already done. The squire, bluff and good humoured, twittered her at dinner for her silence. Come, Mary, smiles and thanks are well enough in the way. And you must make up your mind. You are too young to live alone, you know, and I'll tell you to your face you're too pretty. There's a home for you here at North Hill, you know that. My wife joins with me in begging you to stay. Plenty to do, plenty to do. There are flowers to be cut for the house, and letters to write, and the children to scold. Why, you'd have your hands full, I promise you, and at the library Miss Bassett would say much the same, leaving a friendly hand upon Mary's knee. We love to have you in the house. Do you not continue here indefinitely? The children adore you, and Henry told me yesterday you should have his pony, but if you'd say the word. That is high tribute from him, I can assure you. We would give you a pleasant carefree time, but no worries of cares. You would be a companion to me when Mr. Bassett is away. Do you still fret after your home at Helford? Then Mary smiled and thanked her once again, and she could not put into words how much the memory of Helford meant to her. They guessed that the strain of the past months still had its hand upon her, and in their kindness strove to make amends, but the Bassots kept open house at North Hill, and the neighbours called for many miles around, with naturally enough one topic of conversation on their lips. 50 and 100 times must Squire Bassot tell his tale, and the names of Altrincham and Jamaica became loathsome to Mary's ear, who would be rid of them forever. Here was another reason for departure. She had become too much of an object of curiosity and discussion, but Bassot, with little shallow pride, would point her as a heroine to their friends. She strove in gratitude. Oops. To do her best, but she was never at ease among them. They were not her kind. They were another race, another class. She had respect for them and liking and goodwill, but she could not love them. And in the kindness of her heart, she would have her enter into the conversation with the company who was present, though she would not sit aside, and though she allowed a while for the silence of her own bedroom, the kitchen, the Richards of the room, with the apple-cheeked wife that would make her welcome. And the squire, flogging his humor, returned to her for her advice, laughing heartily at every word she said. They'll be living vacant, I'll turn in. Will you turn parson, Mary? I warrant you'd make a better one than the last. And she must smile for Ella's sake, wondering that she could be dull as not to guess the bitter memories his words aroused. Well, there will be no more smuggling at Jamaica Inn, he would say, and if I could have my way, no drinking either. I'll sweep the place clean of all those cobwebs, and not a poacher or gypsy will dare show his face within the walls that I have done with it. I'll put an honest fellow there who's never smelt brandy in his life, and shall wear an apron round his waist, and write the word welcome above the door. And do you know who shall call upon him first? Why, Mary, you and I. And he would burst into a shout of laughter, slapping his thigh, while Mary forced a smile in answer rather than his joke should fail. She thought of these things as she walked alone with 12 men more, and she knew she must go away from North Hill very soon, and for these people were not her people, and only the woods and streams in the Helford Valley would know peace and contentment again. There was a cart coming towards her from Kilmer, making tracks in the white frost like hair. It was the one moving upon thing that smiled on silent pain. She watched it in suspicion, for there were no cottages on this moor except Twartha, away in the valley by Withy Brook, and Twartha she knew stood empty, nor had she seen the owner since he had fired her at Rufter. He's an ungrateful rascal like the rest of his breed, said the squire, but for me he'd be in jail now, with a long sentence to serve his great spirit. I forced his hand to add knuckle under I grant he did well after that, and was the means of tracing you, Mary, and that black-coated scoundrel. But he's never as much thanked me for clearing his name of the business as has taken himself the world's end now, for all I know. There's never been a Merlin yet that came to any good, and he'll go the way of the rest of them. So Arthur stood empty, and the horses were gone with their wild fellows and rode upon the moors. Their master had ridden away with song on his lips, and she had known he would. The cart came nearer to the slope of the hill, and Mary shielded her eyes from the sun to watch its progress. The horse bent to the strain, and she saw that it labored beneath a strange load of pots and pans, mattresses, and sticks someone was making for the country with his home upon his back. Even then she did not tremble to the truth. And it was not until the cart was below her and the driver walking by the side looked up to her and waved that she recognized him, and went down towards the cart with a fine show of indifference, and turned at once the horse and passed him and speak to him, while Jim kicked a stone under the wheel and wedged it there for safety. "Are you better?" he called from behind the cart. "I heard you were sick and had taken to your bed." "You must have heard wrong," said Mary. "I've been about the house here at North Hill, and walking the grounds, and there had never been much the matter with me except a hatred for my neighborhood. There was a rumor you were to settle here, and be companion to Miss Bassett. That's more like the truth, I suppose. Well, you had lead a soft life with them, I dare say. No doubt they're kindly people, if you know them." "They've been kinder to me than anyone else in Cornwall since my mother died. That's one thing that matters to me. But I'm not staying in North Hill for all that." "Oh, you're not?" "No, I'm going back home to Helford." "What'll you do there?" "I shall try and start the farm again, or at least work my way to it, for I haven't the money yet. But I've friends there, and friends in Helston too, that will help me at the beginning." "Where will you live?" "There's not a cottage in the village I couldn't call home if I wanted to. We're neighborly in the south, you know. I've never had neighbors, so I cannot contradict you, but I've had the feeling always it would be like living in a box to live in a village. You poke your nose over the gate into another man's garden, and his potatoes are larger than your own. There's talking upon it and argument if you know what to cook a rabbit for supper, and he'll have to sniff of it in his kitchen. G.D., Mary, there's no life for anyone." She laughed at him, for his nose was wrinkled in disgust, and then she ran her eyes over his laden cart in confusion. "What are you doing with that?" she asked him. "I've got a hatred for my neighborhood the same as you," he said. "I want to get away from the smell of peat and bog and the sight of Kilmore yonder, with his ugly face frowning upon me in the dusk till dawn. Here's my home, Mary, and all I've had left of it here in the cart, and I'll take it with me, and set it up wherever my fancy takes me. I've been a rover since a boy. Never any ties, never roots, nor fancies for a length of time, and I dare say I'll die a rover too. It's the only life in the world for me. There's no peace, Jim, when wandering, and no quiet. Heaven knows that existence itself is a long enough journey without adding to the burden. There'll come a time when you'll want your own plot of ground and 4 walls in your roof, and somewhere to lay your poor tired bones. The whole country belongs to me, Mary, if it comes to that, with the sky and a roof and the earth for a bed. You don't understand. You're a woman, and your home is your kingdom, and all the familiar things of day to day. I've never lived like that, and never shall. I'll sleep on the hills one night and the city in the next. I'd like to seek my fortune here and there and everywhere, with strangers for company and passers-by for friends. Today I meet a man upon the road, the journey with him for an hour for a year, and tomorrow he's gone again. We speak a different language, you and I." Mary went on with a pattering of a horse, and a good flush of warm damp beneath her hand. Jim watched her, a ghost of a smile upon his lips. "Which way will you go?" she said. "Somewhere east of tomorrow doesn't matter to me," he said. "I'll never come west again, not until I'm old and gray and have forgotten a lot of things. I thought of striking north after Gunnislake and making for the Midlands. They're rich up there, and ahead of everyone. There will be fortune there for a man who goes to find it. Perhaps I'll have money in my pockets one day and buy a horse for pleasure instead of stealing them." "It's an ugly black country in the Midlands," said Mary. "I don't bother about the color of the soil," he answered. "Moorland peat is black, isn't it? And so is the rain when it falls into your pigsties down at Helford. What's the difference?" "You just talk for argument, Jim. There's no sense in what you say." "How can I be sensible when you lean against my horse, with your wild daft hair and tangled his mane, and I know that in 5 minutes' time you shall be over the hill yonder without you, my face turned toward the Tamar, and you walking back to North Hill to drink tea with Squire Bassett." "Delay your journey, then, and come to North Hill too." "Don't be a darned fool, Mary. Can't you see me drinking tea with the Squire and dancing with his children on my knee? I don't belong to his class, and neither do you. I know that, and I'm going back to Helford because of it. I'm homesick, Jim. I want to smell the river again and walk my own country. Go on then, turn your back to me and start walking now. You'll come to a road after 10 miles or so that will take you to Bodmin, and from Bodmin to Truro, and from Truro to Helston. Once in Helston, you'll find your friends and make a home with them until your farm is ready for you. You are very harsh today and cruel. I am harsh to my horses when they are obstinate and out of hand, but it doesn't mean I love them any less. You've never loved anything in your life, said Mary. I haven't had much use for the word, that's why, he told her. He went round to the back of the cart and kicked the stone away from the wheel. What are you doing? Said Mary. It's past noon already, and I ought to be on the road. I've havered here long enough, he said. If I were a man, I'd have asked you to come with me, and you'd fling your legs over the seat and stick your hands in your pockets and rub your shoulders with me for as long as it pleased you. I'd do that now if you'd take me south, she said. Yes, but I'm bound north, and you're not a man, and you're only a woman. As you'd know your coast, you came with me. Move off of the trace there, Mary, and don't twist the rein. I'm going now. Goodbye. He took her face in his hands and kissed it, and she saw that he was laughing. When you're an old man, when you're an old maid in mittens down at Helford, you'll remember that, he said, and it will have to last you to the end of your days. He stole horses, you'll say to yourself, and he didn't care for women, but for my pride, I'd have been with him now. He climbed into the cart and looked down upon her, flicking his whip and yawning. I'll do 50 miles before tonight, he said, and sleep like a puppy at the end of it, in a tent by the side of the road. I'll kindle a fire and cook bacon for my supper. Will you think of me or not? She did not listen, though. She stood with her face towards the south, hesitating and twisting her hands. Beyond those hills the bleak moors turned to pasture, the pasture to valleys and to streams. The peace and quiet of Helford waited for her beside the running water. It's not pride, she told him. You know that it's not pride. There's a sickness in my heart for home and the things I've lost. He said nothing, but drew the reins into his hands and whistled to the horse. Wait, said Mary. Wait and hold him still. And give me your hand. He laid the whip aside, and reached down to her, and swung her beside him on the driver's seat. What now? He said, and where do you want me to take you? You have your back to Helford. Do you know that? Yes, I know, she said. If you come with me, it'll be a hard life, and a wild one at times, Mary, with no riding anywhere, and little rest and comfort. Men are ill companions when the mood takes them, and I, God knows, the worst of them. You'll get a poor exchange for your farm, and small prospect of peace you crave. I'll take the risk, Jim, in any chance your moods. Do you love me, Mary? I believe so, Jim. Better than Helford? I can't ever answer that. Why are you sitting here beside me, then? Because I want to. Because I must. Because now and forevermore this is where I belong to be, said Mary. He laughed then, took her hand, and gave her the reins, and she did not look back over her shoulder again, but set her face towards the mark. That's the end of it. Okay. Um, my issues with it. This is my second time reading it. I've also seen the movie before. I just, or an adaptation of it before. It was pretty good. I just have an issue with some of the sentences being so busy. They're so full of so many different concepts that my mind, it's like sometimes I just can't keep up with it, especially if I'm trying to go at a certain pace. It's like then I fly over it and I'm like, I can't understand that. And I mean, I like reading fast, but I just mean it's not a book that you can absorb fast like you'd want to if you like reading fast. It's like there are some things that it's like it almost forces you to have to reread whole sentences. Sometimes it's like a whole paragraph will make no sense because it's like detailed in a way that's got multiple things going on at the same time. And um a little bit of the action towards the end with that whole mountain stuff or like I can't picture it. I don't know, are they like in are they near a beach? Like or is it just random like rocks? Is it mountains? What is it exactly? And then is it like swampy? I can't, and I don't understand this thing of like what direction certain things are supposedly happening in towards the end there. It's like confusing to me. Hard for me to picture towards the end. Just that one part is just like, okay, you've lost me. Just that one chapter. Um, I actually don't have much confusion for most of it. It's just near the end there. And actually I have some confusion regarding that too with the like I mean I get that the Vicar ends up evil. But the thing is, it seems like towards the end, like he can't make up his mind. Is he going to kill her or does he want her to be his companion? And then it's like one moment he's wanting her around, like you would be the perfect companion kind of thing. And then the next moment he's like, don't worry, I'm not interested in you. Well, what does he want, though? It's like, so that's a little bit, um, there's a lot of confusion there with that character, which I feel like there's supposed to be. You're supposed to constantly be wondering at that character. Like, he just seems so crazy. Um, it does have a kind of like funny, almost sad sort of like twist at the end where she comes to this realization, like a full circle thing, that this must be how it started with her aunt. Like she's swept off her feet, fell in love. Um, but her problem throughout the book is that she tries too hard to compare the brothers, and she's just so quick to assume that they're exactly alike just based upon their shared experiences. And I feel like that's a problem that people make too much. Um, that if you grow up in a family that has certain traumatic events, that everyone in that family is going to have shared um, ways of coping that are unhealthy, and that's just not how it works. Like you can have very different personalities among siblings, and not everybody matures the same way. Some people mature differently. Anyway, it's still a fantastic sort of like thing, just showing her kind of like she comes to have both where she's still able to maintain her kind of strength of mind and will, but also um, to allow herself to love and be loved at the end. So it's still romantic, but it's not like romance with a cost exactly. Although I mean, there is some, just based on the fact that there are some things that like that she has to realize like her life will be a little more difficult. Um, there will be a different set of responsibilities in her life. Um, but what's important is that she's very courageous still and free spirited, and she still holds on to that bold courage at the end, while still having some optimism and hope for the future. So it's good. It is a good book, but it also just kind of has that warning to it that as much as you want to help some people, sometimes you can't, and it's like a very harsh truth. But I feel like that book really puts that point across, and also to not judge people based on the little things you know about them, because there are some things you may never expect about people. Um, so it's always good to still be careful, um, still trust your instincts and trust your gut. There are moments throughout the book where she feels like something's off with the vicar, and it's mentioned every now and then. Like there's a mask that slips. She notices. I feel like it's a very important thing that is thrown in now and then throughout the book. This thing of like noticing little things, but then she's kind of like trying to brush it aside. Like, why am I judging this person? Am I just like becoming so cynical and mistrusting kind of thing? But it's just a good balance towards the end, I feel like, that she comes to, and I think it's a good book. And I love the way that the character develops throughout the book. It's not like over like sudden maturity, but she's like slowly going through things that are um, growing her character. She's going through them. Anyway, I still think it's a good book. I did want to read Frenchman's Creek, but the sentences, and this is nothing against the writing style because I do like the writing style, but sometimes the sentences are just so full of multiple concepts, and it can be hard sometimes to read them aloud. But I mean, that's okay. It's still a good book. Anyway, thank you for listening. Good night. Not sure when I'm going to read more. I might read Frenchman's Creek next. I don't know how long it is. I think it's shorter though than that one.